Hello, good morning, everybody. Today we will discuss the secularization debate, and for this discussion, we have the source material by Peter Berger and his famous article published in 2001 titled Reflections on the Sociology of Religion Today. It came out in the journal Sociology of Religion, volume 62, number 4. And while we will deal with secularization debate, basically we would focus on the notion of secularization, then about the basic issues of the debate, and then we try to put some evidences, empirical evidences about this debate. So let us start with the very concept of secularization. So actually secularization signifies a diminishing importance of religion in society, and not only in society but also in the consciousness of individuals. So in our thought, in our imagination, and of course in our action, the influence of religion diminishes. So this diminishing importance of religion, it gets its reflection in the level of society as well. So the society as well as the consciousness of individual, in all these domains, the influence of religion gets diminished, and that precisely what secularization is all about. Now, most sociologists, including the classical sociologists, they believe that secularization is the direct result of modernization. So there is a kind of one-to-one relationship between secularization and modernization, and direct relationship means that with increasing degree of modernization in any society, the level of secularization also increases. So that is the direct one-to-one relationship between secularization and modernization, that with the increase in one dimension, there is a kind of concomitant increase in the other dimension. So with the increasing level of modernization, the degree of secularization also increases. So the relation between modernity and religion is definitely inverse, because if secularization signifies the diminishing influence of religion, then with increasing modernization, this influence of religion in society or in the consciousness of individual, that declines. So that way there is a sort of inverse relationship between modernity and the influence of religion. Now, the more modern a society is, since the relationship is inverse between modernity and the influence of religion, so with the society getting more modern, or the more modern a society is, the less, obviously, since the relationship is inverse, so the less important would religion be there. So that is the kind of inverse relationship between modernity or the process of modernization and the influence of religion in society or on the consciousness of individual. So with modernity, secularization has a kind of direct one-to-one relationship. That means with increasing level of modernization, degree of secularization also increases. Now, if secularization signifies the declining influence of religion, then with modernization, there we find an inverse relationship between the influence of religion. So what happens that as a society grows more modern, so the influence of religion diminishes in that society. Now, why is this inverse relation? Why we find this inverse relation between degree of modernization of any society and the influence of religion on that society? So why is this inverse relationship? And that precisely is the central argument of secularization theory. So why is this inverse relation? Now, ascendancy of modern scientific and rational thinking, that is the corner, or these are the cornerstones of modernity or or the process of modernization brings into this, that scientific and rational thinking envelops or it grows. Now, with the growth of this scientific rationality or modern scientific and rational outlook, uh, obviously less space is left for the supernatural, because with science, with rational thinking, the influence of supernatural naturally gets down or diminishes. So progressive differentiation of modern institution, that is yet another reason that with increasing modernization, what happens that the institutions progressively gets differentiated with increasing division of labor, with increasing specialization. The institutions gets progressively differentiated and they become more and more specialized, and that is yet another reason for the inverse relation. Why? Because with progressive differentiation of the institutions, the so many institutions, they become autonomous, they become specialized kind of thing, and that particularly happens in the case of two most important institutions in our society, that is the state, that means the political institution, and the church or the religious institution. So before, I mean, in pre-modern society precisely, what happened that the state and the church, they were in kind sort of hand in glove, and there was a kind of, say, close association or relation between the state and the church. But with progressive differentiation of the institutions, there is a sort of detachment between the state and the church. That means the political institution and the religious institutions, they get detached. So as a result of that, what happens that the state cannot or the state is not in a position to dictate to anyone to follow a particular religious course. So that way, the delinking of state and church in modern democracy obviously makes religion a voluntary affair. So if any individual wants to follow the course of religion, he or she, I mean, is at will to do that. But the state cannot force anyone, the state cannot dictate anyone to follow the religious course, which in pre-modern times the state used to do. So with progressive differentiation of the institutions, that happens in the context of modern society, and with this progressive differentiation of the institutions, the state and the church gets delinked, and as a result, religion becomes something as a voluntary matter. Now, modern process of migration, with increasing degree of modernization, we witness, I mean, um, people migrating from one place to another in larger volumes. So with modernization, this volume of migration increases, the degree of urbanization also increases, and mass communication, that also increases, and all these undermine the traditional way of life. So whenever people are moving from one place to another, or whenever the degree of urbanization in any society is increasing, or the mass communication or the level of mass communication is enhancing, then with this the traditional way of life gets undermined. So the influence of religion, which has got a more I mean, saliency in the traditional societies, obviously in the context of modern society, with the I mean, increasing influence of the process of modernization, uh, the with the influence or with the increasing influence of, say, scientific way of thinking, scientific outlook, this traditional way of life is undermined, and as a result, the influence of religion in social life also declines. So these are the, I mean, reasons for the inverse relation, that why increasing modernization results into a kind of diminishing influence of religion in social life. Now, what is the I mean, cause of this inverse relation? Is anti-religion ideology the cause, or uh, or can we say that people in the modern society are becoming more and more anti-religious? So the question precisely is, Berger is also raising, that is anti-religion ideology the cause? And obviously the answer is no. There is no such equation between anti-religion ideology and the increasing level of secularization. So now Berger is coming up with some examples, and he's talking about Durkheim. Of course, Durkheim is an atheist, and also Weber, who was an agnostic. Both these schools, I mean the sociologists like Durkheim, who was an atheist, and a sociologist like Weber, who was an agnostic. Along with this, those who deplored and those who greeted or welcomed the alleged decline of religion. So we are witnessing a decline of religion in modern society, and a quarter is there who are deploring this decline, and a quarter is there who are greeting or welcoming this decline of religion in social life in modern context. Now all these different quarters, I mean not only different but opposed quarters also, they all share the assumptions of the secularization theory, that with increasing modernization the degree of secularization is also increasing, or with increasing modernization the influence of religion in modern society is declining. So all these quarters, the agnostic, the atheist, or the quarter who are deploring the decline of religion in modern society, or the other quarter or the other segment who are welcoming the declining influence of religion in modern society, all these different quarters, they share this common assumption that with increasing modernization the degree of secularization also increases, or with increasing modernization the influence of religion declines in modern society. Now the religious circles also admit. So if we think about the religious circles also admit that we are indeed living in a secular world. So directly now we are referring to the religious circles, people who are highly religious. They also believe that we are indeed living in a secular world. So there is no debate regarding that. In modern society, we are having a kind of secular outlook, we are having kind of secular culture, and even the religious circle, they or the people who are believers in different religions, they also admit that we are living in a sort of secular world, both in Europe and in America. So here we have come across two words, atheist and agnostic. Now what these two words imply? So atheist believes that there is no God. That is the position of the atheist, that there is no God. And the agnostic neither believes nor disbelieves in God. So the whether God is there or not, or whether there is a kind of reality called God, that is not the debate to the agnostic. They neither believes in God or not disbelieves in God. But the atheist believes firmly that there is no God. Now look, Durkheim was an atheist and Weber was an agnostic, and both these, I mean, both these classical sociologists, they admit that yes, with increasing secularization, with increasing modernization, the level of secularization also increases. Now, this secularization theory, that means this very relation between modernization and secularization, is now getting questioned, and that is the core of the debate, secularization debate, that now sociologists are questioning this equation, this relation between modernization and secularization. So majority of sociologists now dealing with religion no longer adhere to the relation of modernity and secularization. So they are now, or the sociologists of religion in contemporary period, they are now not in a position to admit that with increasing modernization the level of secularization also increases. They are not admitting this core principle of the secularization theory, and that constitutes the essence of the secularization debate, or that is the basic issues involved in the secularization debate. Now Berger, he is also abandoning this old secularization theory, because he finds, very, not very sound empirical support in favor of this secularization theory. So Barger is also abandoning this secularization theory. That means he is also questioning and he is also abandoning the link between modernization and secularization in any society. And Barger believes the world, with some notable exception, is as religious as it has ever been. So the influence of religion is declining in modern society. Barger doesn't seem to agree with this, and he believes that the world is as religious today as it was in earlier times, and in some places it is becoming more religious rather. So in some places the world is now, or in some areas, the influence of religion is now, more revealed than the earlier societies. So secularization is by no means the direct and inevitable result of modernity. So Barger also, by by giving this, citing this example, Barger is also claiming that secularization cannot be the direct and inevitable result of modernity. So there is no necessary link between modernity and secularization. Now, in much of the world today, in the contemporary world, in much of the contemporary world, what we are witnessing? We are witnessing that there are extremely powerful upsurges of religious movements in contemporary world. Extremely powerful upsurge of religious movements. Now, the two most important movements of, the two most important religious movements in contemporary period. The first one is the wide resurgence of Islam that is taking place in, different corners of this globe. Now, less widely noted explosion of evangelical Protestantism, especially in its Pentecostal version. So there is a kind of resurgence of Islam in much of the world today. And not only Islam, the evangelical Protestantism is also in a sort of upsurge, and especially its Pentecostal version. That means who believes that God is to be experienced. That means they are far more conservative. They believe that God is there, and they believe that God is there, and and God is to be experienced. So they are, more directly religious. So this variety of, Protestantism, especially the Pentecostal version of evangelical Protestantism, they are also having an upsurge. Now, besides these two, the powerful revitalizations among Roman Catholics, especially in developing countries, the Roman Catholics, there is a sort of revitalization movement going on among the Roman Catholics, especially in the developing countries, and Eastern Orthodox Christians, and quite dramatically in Russia, these Eastern Orthodox Christians, they are also having an upsurge, and the Jews in Israel and in the diaspora, and the Hindus and Buddhists in some other parts of the world, especially in India and some South Asian countries. These all religious, movements, they are, now characterizing much of the world today. So the issue of religious fundamentalism, another point, is also there. Now much of the world is facing the crisis of religious fundamentalism. So if anyone says that with increasing modernization, level of secularization also increases, then certainly these examples do not fit with that. So these examples basically point out that there may not be any necessary correlation between modernization and secularization in any level of society. So in modern society, if the secularization theory claims that with increasing modernization, the degree of secularization increases, at least the the examples or empirical evidences which we can collect from the world today, that those examples do not lend support to this claim that modernization, or with increasing modernization, level of secularization increases, that this equation uh, fails to find enough support. So, if we put it very simply or in very precise term, so most of the world is bubbling with religious passions today. Most of the world is bubbling with religious passions today. So there is no question of arguing that in modern society today, the religion or the institution of religion is having a decline. That is not the case. Rather, on the contrary, we are witnessing that there is an upsurge of religious movements in most of the world. So, in most of the world, uh, religious passions are bubbling. So, the world is bubbling with religious passions. Now, secular, political, and cultural elites are on the defensive. Secular, political, and cultural elites, now we find them in most of the world that they are in a sort of defensive pose. They are on the defensive against the resurgent religious movements, since there are, as we have mentioned in the last slide, that there are so many religious movements on the characterizing the modern contemporary society throughout the globe. So the secular political elites and the cultural elites, they are on the defensive against these resurgent religious movements. And that is the case in Turkey, Israel, India, and the United States. And we are just mentioning these countries as examples, but in much of the world today, we can find that uh, that the religious movements are on the upsurge, and the secular political and cultural elites, they are on the defensive against it. So that is the sin, or that is the context, that is the situation we find in much of the world today. So where does secularity fit on this map? If we can see throughout the globe the resurgence of religious movements, then uh, of course in moderns, while we are talking about this map, while we are looking at this modern world today, and where we are finding that religious movements are on the upsurge, then where does secularity fit in this map? First, a thin but very influential stratum of intellectuals. A very thin, very thin means very few number of influential stratum of intellectuals. So some intellectuals are there, they are influential but very thin. People with Western style higher education, of course, people with Western style higher education, especially in the humanities and social sciences. People who are, I mean, educated in a sort of Western style in the humanities and the social sciences, uh, they they compose a very thin but influential stratum of intellectuals. Now they are secular. Second, in Western and Central Europe, we can find uh, we can find the influence of secularity. How? The only major part of the world, this Western and Central Europe constitute the only major part of the world in which the old secularization theory continues to be empirically tenable. So, this part of this world, this Western and Central Europe, is the only area, is the only part of the globe where we find the modern secularization theory to have some hold. But in other parts of the globe, the modern secularization theory, that means the which states about the equation between modernization and secularization, that theory fails to gain much base in the rest of the world. So in a very small, in a very specific area of the world, that is the Western and Central Europe, we find this old secularization theory to hold some ground, but in rest of the world we fail to come across, or we fail in rest of the world witness that the old secularization theory just doesn't hold. So that way, can we ask that, since the old secularization theory is still valid or tenable in Central and Western Europe, so can we say that this Europe, Central and Western Europe, or the European countries, they are religiously different? Can we say that since secularization theory or the old secularization theory still is tenable in Central and Western Europe, so from this evidence can we say that Europe is religiously different? And if it is so, then obviously the question is why it is so. So obviously this is an important question in sociology of religion today. This is an important question, a crucially important question, that is Europe an exception? So can we say that European exceptionalism, that in the rest of the world, the old secularization theory is failing to have any ground, but in Central and Western Europe, the old secularization theory still holds enough ground? So is it is exception? So is Europe exception? And can we call it European exceptionalism? It is observed that in contrast to Europe, United States is a very religious country. We can observe it, that in contrast to Europe, the USA is more religious. For example, if we want to substantiate this, then we can have this example, that rates of daily prayer in Europe is less than 25%. That means the rates of daily prayer offered by the people in Europe is less than 25%, but in US the same figure is 55%. So the people of US, or as a whole US, is more religious than Europe. This is just one of the evidences, and we can have some other evidences as well, but this is just for the sake of our discussion, that in Europe we see that the influence of religion is on the decline, but in USA that is not the case. So we can say that that United States is a more religious country than Europe. Now, given the universal presence of religion in the modern world, so religion, or the influence of religion in the modern world, is universal. Uh, in that context, in that background, European secularization appears not as the modern norm. So, since the whole world is bubbling with religious passions, since the whole world, so that way, this may not be a norm of the Europe, but as a case of deviance, Europe may be a case of deviance. So we need to explore, or we need to throw some light on these evidences of Europe and USA, that whether Europe can be called as an exception or as a deviance. So in the next portion, we will be coming about all this. So since the whole world is becoming more and more religious, Europe is somehow different. So rather than exception, we can say that that is not the modern norm. That may not be the modern norm, since the modern world is bubbling with religious passions, and Europe is differing with that. So whatever we are coming across in Europe, that may not be the modern norm, but a case of deviance. So how does Europe or European secularity manifest itself empirically? Now we are trying to explore the secularity which is prevailing in Europe empirically, of course. Now we can see that the secularity in Europe we can witness in behavior related to the churches, in behavior of the people related to the churches. In Western and Central Europe, we witness dramatic decline. In Central and Western Europe, we witness dramatic decline in people's participation in church life. So that is one mark of secularity of Europe. that there is a dramatic decline in people's attendance or participation in church life. The influence of religion in public life is also declining in Europe, and the number of people choosing religious vocations, that number is also shrinking in much of the Europe, precisely in Central and Western Europe. Secondly, this secularity of Europe also manifests itself in the declining number of people who profess traditional religious beliefs. That means number of people professing traditional religious beliefs, we can witness a decline in that number also. So this is so in Northern and Southern Europe, of course, and Greece, and even in the Quebec, that we come across this evidences of secularity. So Europe exhibits a definite tendency towards secularity, and these are the empirical evidences. So from people's participation in religious life, in church life, in say in religious vocations, or there is a declining number of people who profess traditional religious beliefs. So all these are the evidences in support of European secularity. But are the evidences sufficient? These are evidences, of course, but can this be sufficient? Are the evidences sufficient? Now, European secularization not beyond dispute. So, whatever we come across in Europe, the picture of secularity in Europe, or the empirical evidences in support of the claim of European secularity, these are not beyond dispute. The situation might be a shift away from the traditional churches. So in Europe, we are finding that people are shifting away from traditional churches, but large numbers of people today are practicing their religiosity in non-traditional, individualized, and institutionally loose ways. So the method of participating in religion is differing. It is not that the influence of religion is declining. We are doing religion, but in a different way. That means we means the people of Europe, they are practicing their religiosity in non-traditional way, in a much more individualized fashion and institutionally loose ways. So the ways to participate in religion, or the people's interaction with the institution of religion is changing. That doesn't mean that the influence of religion is declining. We cannot see that there are large number of people, or more and more participation in church life. That may not be the case. That the attendance in church, or the, as we have given the example, that the daily prayer, the rate of daily prayer in Europe is declining. It is now near about 25%. So this does not imply that the influence of religion is declining. People are doing religion in a different way, in a non-traditional way, in a loosely institutional way. So that does not mean that the grip or hold of religion is losing among the Europeans. That is not the case. Sociologists should concentrate on studying these new forms of religiosity. That is the need of the situation, that calls the sociologists to focus on religion, or the newer dimensions of religion, or the newer phases of religiosity, which the European experience is showing. So we need to focus on religion, or how religion is reproducing itself, or how people are doing religion, practicing religion in a different way, in a much more individualized way, in a loosely institutional ways. So that means that we need to focus on religion from a different angle, not from the traditional angle. We need to have a renewed focus, a kind of, say, refocusing on religion. So modernity and secularization, that means the link between modernity and secularization hence becomes doubtful, because in Europe what is happening is not the decline of religion. What is happening that people are participating in religious, or people are practicing religion in a different way. And so that does not mean that the influence of religion is declining in Europe itself. So the very link between modernity and secularization hence becomes doubtful. So comparison between Europe and America makes the equation modernity and secularization extremely difficult to sustain. Why? Because America is so much more religious. Now we are throwing some different angle to all these things. So America is more religious. We have also seen that in the say in the example of daily prayer, that the rate of daily prayer in US is near about 55%. So America is much more religious than Europe. But can America hardly be called as less modern than Europe? So if modernity and secularization is linked, and if one society grows modern, the level of secularization also increases. Now, if we see that in America, the rate of daily prayer is more than Europe, and can we and if we and or from other evidences, if we can substantiate that America is more religious than Europe, then can we say that America is less modern than Europe? Certainly not. So that relation between modernity and secularization again becomes doubtful, because in case of America, where people are more religious, we see that America is also more modern than Europe. So with increasing modernity in USA, people are becoming more religious. So the question of or the very relation between modernization and secularization again is failing to have much ground, because America cannot be said to be less modern than Europe, but in America we are having more influence of religion. So the reasons of the difference in say in the case of US and Europe, that why we are coming across two different pictures. In US people are more religious, in Europe people are less religious. So why we are having these differences in these two areas? So the two reasons for the differences are political and educational. So in the case of political or the political reasons, close relation between church and state in Europe. In Europe, the church and state is still having a close relation, in contrast to America, with the result that political opposition in Europe often contained an anti-clerical component. So traditionally in Europe, the state and church were very close. So whenever there was any political opposition against the state in Europe, obviously it became a sort of anti-religious campaign, because the church and the state, these two were very close. So if there was any opposition, political opposition against the state, obviously it acquired a sort of anti-religious, anti-church sort of form. So that way in Europe, this is the case, that since the church and the state is very close, so any political opposition in Europe often contained an anti-clerical component, that means an anti-religious component, because opposing the state was kind of equivalent to opposing the church. In the case of education or the educational reasons, in Europe, public education has been mainly in the hands of the state. So this is the European case, that public education has been mainly in the hands of the state. So state controlled education we can find in Europe. The state sends out teachers into all corners of the land. It is the responsibility of the state to send out teachers in all corners of the land. Now, these state recruited or state deputed teachers were foot soldiers in the army of secular enlightenment. Now, these teachers were deputed by the state. They were basically the bearers or foot soldiers of secular enlightenment values in different parts of the land. But in US, the schools were under local authorities. That means there is no such state, control of education in US. So in US, the schools were under local authorities where wishes of the parents mattered. So since the schools in US are under local authority, so there was considerable influence of the local parents over the school. So unlike Europe, where state or state directed or controlled education system we can find, but in US we find that the education system is mainly under the influence of local authorities, where the wishes of the parents was important. Now European parents had to put up with the teachers sent by the educational authorities. Since the state is controlling the education system in Europe, the state is sending the teachers to every or all corners of the land in Europe. So the parents, they had to put up with the teachers sent by the state. But in US, in the case of American parents, they were basically, more influential, more important, since the schools were under the local authorities and the teachers were under the control of the local authorities, where the wishes of the parents did matter more. So there, in case of American parents, uh, however unenlightened they may be, however unenlightened, that means the general parents, they may be, or however unenlightened they may be, they could fire the teachers because they have some important say in the educational system, since it was under the control of the local authorities, not under the control of the overarching state. So this is yet another reason that why secularity is more manifest in Europe than in America, because in Europe it is the secular state which was controlling the education system. They were sending teachers from, in every corner of the land, and these teachers, they were the carriers or foot soldiers of the secular enlightened values. But in US, the education system was basically under the influence of, under the guidance and control of the local authorities. So in US, what we can find in US, that the under the local authorities, this education system had to give, I mean priorities to the values of the parents, the wishes of the parents. And these parents, however unenlightened they may be, but they had definite say in the administration of the school, in the affair of teaching and learning. And if the teachers, if they cannot say, if they or if they wish, since their wish matters more in the schools in US. So if the parents consider the teachers are not, say, the teachers are not up to the mark, so they could fire the teachers. But that is not the case in Europe, since the teachers were deputed by the state. So that is the case, that in Europe, the teachers, they were the carriers of the they were the foot soldiers of the secular values. But in US, since the schools were under the control of local authorities, where the wishes of the parents were important, so the parents were in a position to fire the teachers if they wished it. So that is the case. That the two education system is different. In Europe, we find that it is under the state control. The teachers were deputed by the state. The teachers hence became the foot soldiers of the secular enlightened values of the state. But in US, the education system and the teachers basically were under the influence of local authorities, where the wishes or wills of the parents were important. So these parents were at will to fire the teachers if they wanted it. So that way, the different educational system prevailing in Europe and America, these two, this difference in the educational system is also one of the important reasons that why in Europe we find more, more importance to secularization, and why in US there is, I mean, more, or why US is more religious compared to Europe. Europe is less religious. At least what at least the evidences suggest that Europe is less religious than US, and US is more religious than Europe. Thus, the entire thing, rather than equating the modernization and secularization kind of thing, we can think in a different way. We can have two reasons for this difference between Europe and America, and one is political, another one is educational. So these precisely, I mean, this education and political differences of the two areas are precisely the reasons behind the level of secularization or different level of secularizations we come across in these two areas. This is, I mean the link between modernization and secularization is not the basic issue. So Berger is basically questioning and finally abandoning this old secularization theory that whenever a society grows modern, it becomes more secular. That may not be the case. Basically, the very reality or the very nature of the social reality determines whether we can find secularization or not. So that is not the case that always modernity breeds secularity. That is not the case. uh, Precisely the instances of Europe and America brings to the fore that rather than having this equation, we need to focus on some other social or sociological dimensions. That means we need to focus on the educational scenario, we need to focus on the political setup of the two different areas in order to have some idea about the different levels of secularization prevailing in these two areas. Thank you.